Hello, everybody online with us. I'm Chavatiro Samuelson. I'm Regents Professor of History here at ASU, and Irving and Miriam Law Professor of Modern Judaism. I also serve on the board of directors of Genocide Awareness Week. And that initiative, I want to start with a few words about that. That initiative that we call Genocide Awareness Week is really very unique, and I want everybody who has been with us and who is joining us to appreciate the uniqueness of GAW, Genocide Awareness Week. Number one, it's a comparative project. So we look not at one case of genocidal activity and genocidal outcomes, but rather it's all kind of instances of genocides all over the world. That's quite unique. Second, we do it in an interdisciplinary way. Okay, we bring in history and sociology and political science and psychology and philosophy and ethics, and the list can go on and on. And third, we are very committed to do public-facing scholarship. Scholarship is not just for scholars alone. Scholarship is for everybody. It's for the benefit of the society at large, and that's what we are committed doing. So this afternoon, in this particular session, we're going to pay more attention to issues that we have not really covered in this week so far. We're going to pay more attention to law, especially international law. We're going to pay more attention to policies and to issues of justice, which until now we did not pay that much attention to it, at least not directly. The person who is going to help us do all this is Dr. David Michael Crane. And I believe that he's currently associated with American University, but he has a very long and illustrious career before that. Dr. Crane is a lawyer who has served for 30 years, the United States federal government. He retired from the federal service after he was the director of the Office of Intelligence Review in the Department of Defense. And in that capacity, he oversaw, on behalf of the Secretary of Defense and the Intelligence Committees of the United Congress, 80% of the U.S. intelligence community organizations. Dr. Crane's career in the Department of Defense has focused on 3 distinct countries. I tried to put together kind of his story, a very complex story, in a way that the audience can easily understand. So one area is Sierra Leone, another area is Syria, another country is Syria, and the third is the Ukraine. So in Sierra Leone, Dr. Crane was the chief prosecutor of the Special Court for Sierra Leone. He founded that, he ran it for 3 years, 2009 to 2005. And in this capacity, he indicted the then president of Liberia, Charles Taylor. Probably some people remember him. And he was the chief prosecutor in this International War Crime Tribunal in West Africa. So this is under the auspices of the United Nations. His experience is documented in his book, Every Living Thing, Facing Down Terrorists, Warlords, and Thugs in West Africa. And then the subtitle is, most important to us, A Story of Justice, published in 2019 by Carolina Academic Press. So this book details his experiences in Sierra Leone and how do you work on behalf of victims of atrocities. The book shows how the rule of law is more powerful than the rule of the gun, and it provides a paradigm for accounting for war crimes in other countries. So that's Sierra Leone. The other chapter of his career is in Syria, and here he was the leading force in seeking justice for the people of Syria, through the Syrian Accountability Project, and he also assisted in the creation of the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism for the Republic of Syria. The Syrian Accountability Project is part of the Global Accountability Network. And actually, we raised the word of accountability during the week, but until now, we haven't really focused what does that mean and how do you execute that in practice. So it's very important. He did it both in Venezuela and in regard to the Ukraine, and he also worked with the Uyghur issue, or Uyghur issue, you can pronounce it both ways. So 2014, he co-authored the world-famous Caesar Report, which captured for the first time direct evidence of crimes against humanity being committed by the President Assad of Syria. We know where he is today, so he's done that kind of groundwork. And the third region, the third country, is Ukraine, and there he also attempted to seek justice. He assisted the international community in the creation of the Special Tribunal for Ukraine on the crime of aggression. And for these efforts, President Putin, we all know him, has placed sanctions on him and banned him from travel to the Russian Federation. He's one of the 25 individuals that President Putin has personally declared as an enemy of the state. So Dr. Crane holds undergraduate, graduate, and professional degrees from Ohio State University, from Syracuse University, from Case Western Reserve University, and he also had an academic career in addition to his work for the as a civil servant. Dr. Crane taught international law at the United States Army Judge Advocate. This is a very long title. United States Army Judge Advocate General School. And he has served as professor of practice at Syracuse University College of Law from 2006 to 2018. There, he taught international criminal law, international law, national security law, and the law of armed conflict. So he's got very complex and rich career. And this afternoon, he's going to talk to us. Going to give us some more information so we can understand what he calls the dirty little wars of the 21st century. So the main title is Looking Through the Glass Darkly, the Dirty Little Wars of the 21st Century. So let's welcome Dr. Crane.
Well, good afternoon. My wife and I have traveled the world, and I've never been to Phoenix, Arizona before. So
welcome.
And Tempe, it's not a bad campus. I understand you turned the heat down for me. So we've been dying over. I live in Maggie Valley, North Carolina. I look out my deck, and across the valley is the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. So a little different scenario here. You know, of all the titles I've ever held in my life, the one I'm most proud of is Grandpa. And I'm sure some of you can understand that. Well, as you can see, I've been around the world a couple times. I've seen some amazing things. So when I talk to you, yes, I've had the privilege of teaching, and it is truly a privilege. I still do at the American University of Washington College of Law. I teach international criminal practice, teaching law students, master's students, and mid-level career persons how do you set up a international criminal tribunal. I've done two. So I think I know a little bit about that, but I'm not an academic. I'm a practitioner, as you can see. So when I'm talking to you today, it's from I've been in the trenches. I've been in harm's way. As we used to say in Vietnam, I've seen the tiger smile. And so these are some thoughts that I'd like you to consider, but also more importantly, there will be time to hear what you think and ask questions afterwards. So I hope we do have that time to do that. We also have to remember, and with Genocide Awareness Week, we have victims. And this is one of the things that I always reminded my office in West Africa in Freetown. The tribunal wasn't in The Hague. I was in hell in Freetown, just like Robert Jackson at Nuremberg, where 80% of the city was destroyed. I showed up in Freetown and 90% of the city was destroyed. No running water, no electricity. In fact, the water that came out of the tap would kill you. So it was one of those environments. It's not glamorous work. But one of the things I did was set up a town hall program where I walked the countryside listening to the people of Sierra Leone tell me what happened. The victims of atrocities. I think that this is really critical. And one March of 2004, I was in the town of McKinney, which was the headquarters of the infamous Revolutionary United Front, which had a habit of chopping body parts off of people. And what I would do is, instead of standing behind this and being very formal and stuff, and I did this right away, the very first thing was to, one, humble myself before the people and tell them I'm no better than they are. I'm just a tall, lanky American from North Carolina here to try to help them. And so I would just walk right among them. And the first time I did that, my close protection officers almost had a heart attack because I didn't tell them because it was spontaneous. I realized the only way I'm going to get to know the people of Sierra Leone is stand among them. So I stood among them, and here I was. And of course, I had a level 3A ballistic vest on, which is very thin, but would stop a 9mm from about 3 meters. So I was well protected, but the darn thing didn't breathe really well. And when you're in 90-degree tropical heat, you can lose a bit of weight, to be sure. But I was standing there and I was listening to people talk to me in McKinney in this bombed out auditorium. And no closer to me than you, this young man stood up and he said, "I killed people. I'm sorry. And I didn't mean it." And he fell into my arms, weeping. And I was told later he was 12 years old. He was a murderer, a rapist. He'd grown up being a child soldier. There were 33,000 of them in that horror story of Sierra Leone. And as he's weeping into my arms, a young woman stood up, probably from the corner here, and she was holding a small child, and she was missing a great portion of her face that had been stuck in boiling water by the RUF. And she said, "The rebels did this to me. Seek justice for us, please." So that's why I do it. That's why we should remember always victims of horrors and atrocities, which we are doing this week, but always. But I tell you this not to make you sad, but just to tell you that this is how this is why I do my work and continue to do my work. And of course, as it was said, it took me 3 years with a group of very smart people, but we created the Special Tribunal on the crime of aggression for Ukraine. And so we are going to go after Vladimir Putin and his foreign secretary, who I actually know personally. We can talk about that at the maybe in the question and answer period. And of course, Mendev and the secretary or the Minister of Defense. So we're going to get them. And we're also going to go after the president of Belarus, the president of North Korea. I was going to go after the Ayatollah of Iran, but another aggressor killed him. So well, more to follow on that, I guess. But the point is that he took care of one guy for me. The means are illegal, but the end is laudable, to be sure. We're going to go after them for aiding and abetting aggression. First time in history that has ever been done. So we're going to go after some bad guys, as we used to say in my office. That was the motto of my office in West Africa: put bad guys in jail. But that's not the title of my talk. You know, we're in atrocity accountability has come in waves. The first wave was in a place called Nuremberg. If you've ever been to Nuremberg, it is a beautiful little town. I spoke right in the very spot that Robert H. Jackson spoke when he gave his amazing opening statement. And the first wave of atrocity accountability was the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg. Now, everybody knows about Nuremberg now, don't they? Because of that movie that is actually terribly wrong. But that's not what I care about. I could get past some of the things. It makes people aware about Nuremberg. That works for me. And I was interviewed, someone said, "What do you think about Nuremberg?" I said, "Well, I'm not going to comment on the movie, but I am very happy to say that actually people are standing at the water cooler going, 'Hey, did you see that movie on Nuremberg?' And they were talking about what? The Holocaust. Remembering. So that's good enough for me, regardless of how the movie turned out. Well, the second wave of atrocity accountability is an amazing event that took place after a 46-year thing called the Cold War, where, if you probably remember, may not, over 90 million human beings died during the Cold War. More people dying in the Cold War than in World War I and World War II combined. Not by these grand world battles, but these little nasty little wars all around the world, in every part of the world, where the West and the Soviets allowed horrors beyond belief in Central America, South America, South Asia, Southeast Asia, what have you. And it added up to around 90 million people. Well, nothing was done. There was no ability to do that. Nuremberg was fading rapidly. There was attempts to create what they called a permanent international criminal court, but it was just discussed. The Cold War really kind of put a damper on the initiatives that we won in Nuremberg. So all of a sudden, the Soviet Union faded in less than a year. For those of you that remember that, can you imagine that? I'd been fighting Soviets, literally fighting Soviets or surrogates of Soviets in my career, and it fell like a house of cards, literally. Within 8 months, it didn't exist. So all of a sudden, the world said, you know, this might be a better place. Let's use the rule of law to try to balance out the horrors of the Cold War. And bam, it didn't take long. You know, history of mankind is the history of war, and the history of war is the history of mankind. John Keegan, military historian. And so we had the first genocide since World War II happened where? That's right, Yugoslavia. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia was created, and the world decided we're going to try these people for international crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. 9 months later, another horror story took place, a massive genocide in Rwanda. The world created the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia. Now, during this time frame, the world didn't really understand, because who thinks about West Africa in any way, shape, or form? But a horror story started in 1991 and lasted all the way until I arrived in 2002, where over 1.2 million human beings were murdered, raped, maimed, and mutilated in West Africa, particularly in Sierra Leone. The president of Sierra Leone wrote Kofi Annan and said, look, I can't do anything about this. I don't have the ability. I know the world is not interested in creating another tribunal, but I need help. And so the United Nations Special Court for Sierra Leone was created, and Kofi Annan called me and said, would you mind helping us out in West Africa? What are you going to say? No. So I said that would be my honor and pleasure. And for 3 years, a wonderful team of ours did that. So what you did, though, is we had these amazing accountability tools. And right in the middle of all this, we all went to Rome and we created the International Criminal Court. This was a heady time. This was the third wave, the age, or the second wave, the age of accountability. For about 15 years, we were taking down heads of state, and we accounted for the destruction of over 7 million human beings during just 8 years in the 1990s. We are really good at what we do, don't we, mankind? It's a dog-eat-dog world, as Norm used to say, and we're all wearing milk-bone underwear. So if you're a Cheers fan, I see a few people nodding, but that's always stuck with me. Well, after about 2015, the special court was the last major tribunal to start and the first to finish. Syria popped off and became a really dark area, and we had 50 million refugees fleeing the Middle East and other parts of the world in northern Africa, moving towards Europe and other places. It created a nationalistic knee-jerk reaction to all of these foreign people coming in. We know this well. We're having that same emotional moment over the past couple of years in this country. The bottom line is those people are coming and they're going to make us impure kind of. In other words, nationalism rose, particularly in Europe, and we see the third wave of atrocity accountability, and that is the age of the strong man. And all of a sudden, we have 12 tyrants, dictators, and thugs around the world, some of which are still here. A couple are gone now, thanks to Donald Trump. Bottom line was the ends was positive, the means were illegal, but the bottom line is we lost. Maduro is in jail, and the Ayatollah was blown away. But now we're down to 10. Sadly, is that we just added another one, and the guy's name is Donald Trump. And seriously, I'm not saying this for political reasons. It's just a practical fact. So we had the age of strongman, and what happened is all of the work that we did in the mid to late 1990s and through the 2000s almost disappeared because everybody turned not to the United Nations and world peace, but internally to their own countries to solve their own problems unilaterally and walked away from the UN, practically speaking. And then something has just happened in the past 9 months. And that is, we've gone to the fourth wave of accountability, and that is the age of aggression. The unilateral use of force not seen since the mid to late 1930s. And we know who that person was, using unilateral use of force to do whatever he felt necessary, gobbling up small pieces of Europe before World War II. We're back to that. Damn it. I thought we were done with this, and we're not. So we gather today to confront a troubling truth, one that sits uneasily with all who believe in the rule of law, the dignity of human life, and the possibility of a more just world. The truth is this: the 21st century has ushered in a new era of conflict, one in which the norms painstakingly built over generations, the laws of armed conflict, are being eroded, ignored, and in some cases, openly defied. We are in many ways peering through what I call the looking glass darkly. What we see on the other side is not the promise of progress, but the shadow of regression. The conflicts of this century are not the grand clashes of armies on defined battlefields. They are dirty little wars, fought in alleyways, apartment blocks, refugee camps, and digital spaces. They are waged by states, by proxies, by militias, by private companies, and actors who answer to no one. These wars are characterized by ambiguity, plausible deniability, and a deliberate blurring of the lines between combatant and civilian. They are conflicts where the victims are not soldiers in uniform, but women carrying water, children walking to school, families sheltering in basements. And in these wars, the foundational principles of the laws of armed conflict, principles that are meant to restrain the worst impulses of humanity, are being cast aside. Let's just briefly talk about what those principles are. There are 4 of them. The first is military necessity, and it's the most important one and the most significant. Military necessity permits only those measures required to achieve a legitimate military objective. Now, let me pause here because I didn't even write this down, but it occurred to me. This presumes that the conflict is lawful. See, that's kind of key. If it's an act of aggression, it's all unlawful. All right? Aggression, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes, is the ultimate crime because it perpetrates the rest of it, doesn't it? If there's no aggression, there's no genocide. There's no crimes against humanity. There's no war crimes because the war didn't start. We can, under United Nations principles, use force, but we only do that as a last resort, don't we? We don't use it as a first resort, that unilateral political gut reaction kind of use of force. Now, it doesn't, the laws of armed conflict, military necessity doesn't permit wanton destruction. It does not justify terrorizing a population. Yet in Syria, we saw military necessity invoked to justify the leveling of entire urban districts. Now, if you've ever been to Syria, it doesn't exist anymore in places. It's Germany, 1945. The bombardment of Aleppo and Homs, where hospitals, markets, and schools were repeatedly struck, was not a necessity. It was a strategy of just pure terror. The second principle of the laws of armed conflict, and there's actual laws on the battlefield, which all nations are required to follow under the Geneva Conventions and other protocols. Proportionality. Proportionality demands that even when a legitimate target is attacked, the expected civilian harm must not be excessive in relation to the anticipated military advantage. Right? It has to be a proportional response. All right. We don't get a sniper in a church, a legitimate target, firing on your unit, and you bring in a B-52 arc-light mission and take out the entire grid square. That's an unproportional response. In Yemen, we witnessed airstrikes on weddings, funerals, water treatment plants, and even a school bus full of children. The military advantage was minimal. The civilian toll was staggering. Proportionality was not merely ignored, and it was inverted. Let me give you a war story. You think I probably have a few. I was a legal advisor to a very specialized American unit, and we were chasing a very bad guy who we had in our gun sights. The problem was he was in the middle of a wedding with 150 people. The commander of that unit turned to me as his judge advocate who advised on the laws of armed conflict, the legal use of force. And we were legally there. We were not, this was not some kind of rogue thing. And he turned to me and said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, you're the commander. It's your decision. But we can take that guy out. We've been filing him for years, but you'll kill 149 other people." He says, "What do you think?" I said, "God, I hate to tell you this, but I think we shouldn't do it." And we didn't. So that's how that works. All right. Now we got the guy later on. But as we used to say in the Smoky Mountains of North Carolina, sometimes you get the bear, sometimes the bear gets you. So we got him. In Yemen, we witnessed airstrikes, like I said, on weddings, funerals, water treatment plants, and even a school bus full of children, as I've said, but the military advantage was minimal. The civilian toll was staggering. Proportionality was not merely ignored. As I said, it was inverted. I just read that paragraph again, didn't I? I got off on a war story. So if I do that again, just kind of wave and go, get back onto the script. Let's talk about the third one, discrimination. At least you got the point, didn't you? All right. Discrimination requires that parties distinguish between combatants and civilians. All right. Between military objectives and civilian objects. All right. Yet in Ukraine, we've seen repeated failure to discriminate. Apartment buildings, maternity hospitals, train stations, and energy infrastructure have been struck in ways that suggest either reckless disregard or deliberate targeting. For example, the attack on the Mariupol Drama Theater, if you remember that, it was a couple of years ago. It was clearly marked. It said sheltering children. Stands as one of the most chilling examples of the principles of abandonment. The Russians, I almost called them Soviets, sorry. The Russians just blew the hell out of the place, killed over 400 children. The fourth principle, and the reason I'm giving you this is I think it's important that you fully understand that, because you hear the laws of armed conflict all the time, the Geneva Conventions all the time, but these are the actual practical principles that we advise commanders in the field. This is what you have to follow in order to avoid war crimes and crimes against humanity. The fourth one is unnecessary suffering. This principle forbids weapons and tactics that cause superfluous injury or unnecessary suffering. You're probably thinking, well, war is hell. Everybody's suffering. Yes, that's true. But if you follow the laws of armed conflict, you can accomplish your military goals without destroying civilian infrastructure and causing unnecessary suffering. But across multiple conflicts, again, we've seen chemical weapons used in Syria, cluster munitions deployed in Ukraine, Syria, Yemen, and by Israel in Lebanon. Illegal. Siege tactics in places that have starved civilian populations. These are not unfortunate byproducts of war. They are deliberate choices that inflict suffering long after the fighting ends. And above all, the cornerstone principle, and this is the one right down, this is on the exam. They told you there's an exam after this, isn't it? Civilians cannot be intentionally targeted. Let me tell you that again. It is in all four Geneva Conventions. It is written in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is in various other protocols, treaties that the UN has put together. Civilians cannot be intentionally targeted. That's not being followed, is it? Today, civilians are targeted precisely because they are civilians, because they are vulnerable, symbolic, or useful as leverage. In Syria, barrel bombs were dropped on civilian neighborhoods. In Ukraine, evacuation corridors and residential blocks have been struck repeatedly. In Yemen, blockades and airstrikes have contributed to famine conditions affecting millions of children. And who pays the highest price? Women and children. women and children. When I was chief prosecutor in Sierra Leone, the cornerstone of my indictments was gender crimes. It had never been done before in international tribunals. But we had a very strange phenomenon called bushwives, which we can talk about maybe in the question and answer period. But they paid a terrible price. They are the ones displaced, trafficked, widowed, and orphaned. They are the ones whose bodies become battlefields. They are the ones whose futures are stolen before they even begin. And one of the side effects to this, and one of the causes of this, and it's very troubling after 81 years, is the erosion of the United Nations respect and authority. I was at the law school an hour or so ago, and I asked the students, does anybody know the name of the UN Secretary General? Well, what's that? Yeah, well, yeah, go ahead. Let me see if we can answer it. Yeah. All right, congratulations. You are probably one of the few in this room, and there certainly wasn't many in the law school either that had any idea who this guy was. You cheated. Who knows Kofi Annan? There you go. Who was the last powerful, respected Secretary General of the UN? Kofi Annan, my old boss. Yeah, and America and other powerful countries hate respected, vigorous, principled Secretary Generals. They want people just like Guterres, quiet, no respect, out of the way. And that's a problem because we're built on a UN paradigm, settling our disputes peacefully, aren't we? Or we should, and only resorting to force as a last resort. So how did we arrive here? I mean, man, the UN peacekeepers won the Pulitzer Peace Prize in the 1990s for the good work that they were doing around the world. Now you don't see very many blue helmets anymore. By the way, there were 17,000 of them in Sierra Leone when I was there. Gunships, tanks, artillery, infantry, lawfully there under UN Security Council resolution to enforce the peace. You don't, you die. All right, but it was lawful use of force, still had to follow the laws of armed conflict, but the bottom line is, yeah, the UN can pack a punch if it wants to. Problem is, they don't want to anymore, or they just don't do it. How did the world's guardrails become so fragile? Part of the answer lies in the loss of stature and, of course, the authority of the United Nations. As I've stated, the UN Charter begins with a simple, profound principle. Disputes shall be, and it's right out of the Charter, disputes shall be settled by peaceful means, and force shall be used only as a last resort. And it has been kind of our guide for 80 years. The 81st year, not so good. This is not naive idealism. It is a recognition of the catastrophic consequences of unrestrained aggression. The United Nations was set up to avoid and stop and prevent one thing that started World War II, and that is aggression. Syria is a great study in paralysis of the UN. For over a decade, the Security Council was paralyzed by vetoes, preventing a unified action to stop mass atrocities. Chemical weapons were used, hospitals were bombed, as I've said. Civilians were besieged, and the world's premier institution for peace and security could not act. I drafted a Ceasar Report. We went to the Security Council. The son of a bitch is murdering his own people, and here's 54,000 pictures of dead people that we can verify. Security Council referred this case to the International Criminal Court. I mean, I remember that day I testified and answered questions in that famous round table for 3 straight hours. They called for a vote. China and Russia vetoed it, and there's never been anything done about Syria ever again. Ukraine, the model aggression in the 21st century, though that was when I wrote this 5 months ago. I actually had to rewrite this speech. The world is changing so fast that I can't keep up with all of the nuanced and terrible changes in just the world order. When I was asked to come here and speak, I said, well, I've got a free time. Let me put something down right now. I rewrote this thing because I read it last week and I go, this is irrelevant. So I'm trying. The invasion of Ukraine represents a textbook case of aggression, precisely the crime the UN Charter was designed to prevent. Yet the Security Council, again, was hamstrung by what? Veto vote, and was unable to respond decisively. The message to the world was unmistakable. Even the most blatant act of aggression can proceed without meaningful institutional restraint. Let's talk about the rise of aggression as state policy, as I call the fourth wave, the age of aggression. We must speak plainly. Aggression has returned as a deliberate strategy of some states. Not accidental escalation, not miscalculation, aggression, planned, justified, and executed. This is not 1936, 37, 38. This is 2025, 2026. This resurgence is not merely a violation of the UN Charter. It is an assault on the entire post-World War II order. It signals to the world that borders can be changed by force, that sovereignty is conditional, that might makes right. And when aggression becomes normalized, the laws of armed conflict inevitably erode. Because a state willing to violate the supreme crime, the crime of aggression, is unlikely to respect the rules governing how the aggression is carried out. So here is looking through that glass darkly. Civilians are targeted with impunity. Women and children bear the brunt of violence. The principles of necessity and proportionality and discrimination and humanity are ignored. Aggression is resurgent. The United Nations struggles to assert its authority. But we must not accept this as the new normal. Can we? The path forward. The laws of armed conflict are not relics. They are not luxuries. They are minimum standards of civilization. To restore them, we must reassert accountability, and we're starting to do that again, through national courts, international tribunals, and universal jurisdiction where appropriate. Rebuild the credibility of the United Nations, not reorganize it, just make it run smarter. That's really all it is. In fact, I just wrote an op-ed about that. But not abandon it, not abandon the ideals of settling disputes peacefully, but by demanding that we live up to its founding principles. Support civil society, journalists, and human rights defenders who document violations at great personal risk. Strengthen the norm against aggression, making clear that territorial conquest will never be recognized. Protect women and children, not as an afterthought. Let me say that again. Protect women and children, not as an afterthought. Remember the women in Afghanistan. We don't, but remember the women in Afghanistan. But make this a central measure of whether a conflict is being waged lawfully. And above all, we must reaffirm a simple truth. The laws of armed conflict are not obstacles to victory. They are guardians of our humanity. We are living in a moment of profound danger, but also profound responsibility. The dirty little wars of the 21st century may be fought in the shadows, but our response must be illuminated by principle, by courage, and by unwavering commitment to the rule of law. And we remember it this week. If we fail, the looking glass will go darker still. If we succeed, we may yet restore clarity and with it hope. I'll close with a little war story, a little vignette. I'm sure you've already suddenly realized I'm replete with war stories. That's what happens after 45 years in the trenches. I was getting ready to leave Sierra Leone after 3 years. And, going to Sierra Leone wasn't like traveling to The Hague. It's like going off to World War II. We left our families. Now, we got a chance to go home, but it was not regularly. And we can talk maybe about that question and answer. How do you get through all of that and we were in Freetown, right at the center of the horror. And I had, as I said, an outreach program where I walked the countryside listening to the people of Sierra Leone tell me what took place here. And I became quite close to them. And we can talk about how you get that trust with a beleaguered peoples. But I always, once a quarter, always for 3 years, went to the Milton Margai School of the Blind. These were students, kindergarten through 12th grade, British school, run by a wonderful lady who received a knighthood for her work in Freetown, like Queen Elizabeth. And so I would visit them, but they were all intentionally blinded by the rebels. So these were damaged human beings. But I always brought with me, at the UN, we had a PX which had Cokes, Fanta, Sprite, and tiny little bite-sized candy bars. And so they called me Uncle Dave, and Uncle Dave always would show up with something that was sweet. Imagine a country, a society that doesn't have sweet things. And to look in the child's eyes when they eat a candy bar for the first time, it's joy. Not an almond joy, but it's joy. There's nothing wrong with that. And so I would always come and I would sit among them, kind of like this. The room was a little bit bigger than this, and I would sit with them, and some of the smaller ones would come and sit on my lap. So I had to go and say goodbye to them. I was leaving. That's hard. Well, we had our town hall meeting and stuff, and we were munching and sipping and stuff. And I don't like Coke at all, but I would down a can. And they said, Uncle Dave, we have something for you before you leave. And so they have this beautiful choir. I mean, Sierra Leoneans can sing, and they performed before Queen Elizabeth at Westminster Abbey. And they sang, "It's a Small World After All." Thank you.
Okay, so you talked about how you were going after Lukashenko, Kim Jong-un, and Putin, but I think that's a laudable goal, but the problem is that do you think the Russians, North Koreans, and Belarusians will be in a position where they would, actually serving anything against Putin would be viable?
No, but the act that they're indicted for aiding and abetting aggression, they can't travel anywhere. They're forever shamed. That does not go away. And if by chance someday there's a political circumstance that they'll turn him over to this new special tribunal, we'll nail the son of a bitch.
Fair enough.
Scare the hell out of him. There's nothing wrong with keeping dictators on their back feet. Okay, that's how you play with their minds. I'll show you. We actually published, the Global Accountability Network published a new piece on aiding and abetting, and we used Lukashenko as the example. And in the appendix was a sample draft indictment of Lukashenko for aiding and abetting aggression. It just so happens over the past year he has slowly backed away from supporting Russia, and he is open to talks in fact, there are current talks with the United States about opening up better trade and stuff. Not saying anything, but isn't that coincidental? So dictators read. They know, they may not say much, but they're aware that there are footsteps by good people who are going to find them liable for what they've done. And again, in the international criminal law, an indictment is for life. So we'll get them or we don't, but they die with an indictment over their head. And that's a huge disgrace. So good question. Thank you.
Very quickly, thank you very much for the enlightening talk. I wanted to ask, and I think there is some level of consensus among all of us here in the audience today, that the United Nations as an international platform is almost dysfunctional in the current circumstances, or as you put it, the Secretary General is pretty much disrespected, not a very esteemed person. Either way, and if that system is not there, and then you look at the national level, different countries, we can think of as many examples as we all can today. The president, the executive side of the government is an authoritarian or somebody with aggressive thoughts and feelings and actions. But then the legislative branch is also very much aligned with the executive branch. And then you got the court system that is either dysfunctional or not, yeah.
Familiar to me. I'm not-
What are your recommendations and thoughts for dealing with such circumstances as today?
It's a great setup. I wrote an op-ed about this about 2 months ago in Juris magazine. You can get it online. It talks about don't do away with the UN, just make it run smarter. And I talk about other alternatives to the UN that in fact, regional organizations are going to have to start stepping up. European Union stepped up. The Council of Europe created this special tribunal for the crime of aggressions against Ukraine. That's a regional organization. So you're going to see, either willingly or unwillingly, you're going to have to see regional organizations step up to do the things that the UN is not able or just unwilling to do based on the stalemate in the Security Council. Because you remember, the UN is not run by the Secretary General. He's just an administrative guy. It's run by the Security Council. And if the Security Council isn't functioning, the UN isn't working. Now, there are special circumstances under the General Assembly, which we tried to get the special tribunal created through the General Assembly, and we were almost there. Almost there. Then October 3rd happened, that tragedy in Gaza, and the whole world walked away from the idea because they were diverted to that terrible tragedy, rightfully so. But my point is, we lost the momentum, so we shifted gears and went to the Council of Europe. So you have to be flexible. But yeah, the world is going to have to, you have to understand this. The world has fundamentally changed in a year. The UN paradigm isn't working. The United States is a pariah state, no different than in North Korea. And so the Western democracies and other democracies around the world have to take a deep breath and go, we're going to have to figure out something else. Now, we may go, in 6 months and in 2 years, this may all go away. But the world has got to get over this, always looking over their shoulder for the United States to give them a blessing to do this. And it took us 3 years to get Europe to create a special tribunal, a new international tribunal without the United States. First time ever. And they were looking over their shoulder. Well, what is the United States? He might put me in the timeout corner. So, and Europe is not a macho kind of group of people. They would rather go get a cup of coffee and a croissant than face down Vladimir Putin. Wrote an op-ed on this in September of 2022. I said, time and distraction are Putin's ultimate weapons. He knows Europe better than we do. He knows they're not going to have the stomach to outlast him in Ukraine. Time and distraction. He's hanging on by his fingernails. They're losing, they've lost over 1 million men in this absurdity. He's hanging on by his fingernails, but he's hoping for another distraction to have the world walk away from Ukraine. Gaza, Iran, Venezuela. This is all playing into Putin's strategic hands. Time and distraction are Putin's ultimate weapons. So we've got to use a regional organization, the Council of Europe, to stay strong and get this court created. Because Putin knows what's going to happen. He's going to be indicted for the crime of aggression. Now, we may not get him, but we'll indict him, and that's the political victory. All right? That'll send a signal to the other tyrants and thugs that are watching like crocodiles. If we do nothing about this aggression, we're in for a bleak 21st century. North Korea comes south, China goes to Taiwan. You can just start going around the world and these things happen because there's no accountability. You're not going to get slapped for it. But if we at least indict him, then that sends that signal. Because being indicted an aggressor is bad for business. China is all about business. That's what drives China. It's not a political take over the world thing. They love business. And that's what they do. If you can hurt their business, they're going to slow down. And having President Xi indicted for aggression is not a place where you want to go and shop around. It's just bad for business. These are great questions and comments. Please, as long as they'll let me stay up here, which we have some time.
Yeah, we do.
Which is surprising. I can't believe yes.
First of all, thank you again for your talk and for sharing your experience in your career. I was wondering if you think that one thing that explains this fourth wave of international law of this age of aggression is this sort of, if you believe in an asymmetrical application of international law in the 90s, of how it was always directed at some countries but not others, and that because some countries have always, been had asymmetrical power in international law in vetoing and not being held accountable, that these contradictions are now proving themselves to be present in this new wave of aggression.
It's a great question, a great comment. The age of aggression is kind of a corollary to the age of the strong man. It kind of follows. If you're looking at it from a political science point of view, it kind of naturally follows. Strong men tend to be not internationalists, and aggression is I'd say, a corollary of that. The thing that needs to be considered here is we have to be nimble and we have to be flexible. We have to think outside the box and look for new opportunities and ways, asymmetrically and directly, to confront these massive fundamental political changes in the world, and to try to figure out ways that we can maintain international peace and security through the rule of law. It may not be the United Nations, even though it should stay. We should keep it as a possibility, but start looking towards other entities, not just regional organizations. We have to bolster non-governmental organizations. We have this thing called universal jurisdiction. I don't want to go too much under the law, but there are countries that are prosecuting individually individuals who've committed war crimes in Ukraine, Syria, Yemen, what have you, if they find them on the soil of that particular country, and their domestic law allows for prosecution of war crimes and crimes against humanity. And that's been happening. Sweden, Germany, Spain are just examples of France, of them prosecuting a Syrian colonel who happened to run a detention facility, and they found him on French soil, and they're prosecuting him because their domestic law allows for individuals found on that soil who committed war crimes elsewhere, but they have it in their statute that allow them to prosecute them there in that soil. So, we're chipping away, being smart, thinking of new ways. The international military, or the IIIM, was a realization by myself with a group of ambassadors that we're having trouble investigating the crimes in Syria because there are so many NGOs involved that are kind of getting in the way and stepping over the crime scene. Plus, there was clearly no political will to create a tribunal for Syria, and we just saw that with the Security Council. They voted it down. So this was a way by which the international impartial mechanism for Syria is another name for an office of a prosecutor who is bringing in all the evidence against Assad and his family and putting it together as if they were creating a case against Assad and his family. Robert Petit, a long-term personal friend of mine from Canada, is the executive director. So that's another example of being nimble and smart about thinking outside the box so that we can get around this real reluctance. The United Nations does not like to create tribunals. They don't, and it's hard. And they usually don't, because it's not a legal decision to create a tribunal, it's a political one. And there is no political will in most parts of the world to create a tribunal. So we're being smart. We also have another one for Myanmar. I didn't create that one, but that was created using the example of Syria. Nobody's going to do anything about Myanmar, but at least creates a mechanism by which someday, if that political weather vane changes, then perhaps we've got an office set up, we've got the evidence, and we're ready to go. So I think I answered your question, but you have to be, we got used to this 80-year paradigm of the United Nations. We got used to it, and it never entered our minds that it doesn't exist. Folks, it doesn't exist anymore. If you remember anything I say, the 80-year UN paradigm no longer exists because the United States has chosen to step away from it. And with it, a major cornerstone of the whole building block of the whole thing. So we have to figure out ways to keep the rule of law and international peace and security by other means. Fortunately, we have that ability. It's just hard to believe. It's just disbelief. But it's a fact in my considered opinion. So other questions, please.
Henry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Dr. Crane, and especially noteworthy was the fact that you were willing to name a U.S. president as part of your group of people who have gone outside the law and committed aggressive acts against civilians, which I appreciate a lot. And I know that in a lot of cases in the U.S., we're very hesitant to look at our own conduct, and I think that's really important. I did want to follow up this issue of selectivity, though, and get pointed about particular cases, and ask you if, and your last point, ask you if it really is just a matter of a constellation of power and interests that determine which cases get tribunals and which don't. Not that the tribunals aren't absolutely justified, don't get me wrong, but the ones that are excluded. I'm thinking about, clear dictator Ilham Aliyev in Azerbaijan and the aggression against Armenians. We certainly can talk about Gaza and Netanyahu, who has committed what are clearly war crimes and so forth. And I'm just curious if you see anything different post-UN, and I agree with you on that point. And if there is any way you see this regionalization that you're talking about potentially being more effective at creating these tribunals with less need for geopolitical approval.
Yeah, that's a very good point. By the way, I want to underscore right now, I'm not up here defending that international criminal law and this whole concept of international peace and security is a perfect system. It sure is not. Okay, but we take our victories where we can. It's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, but that's just a fact. It's always been a problem. The UN Security Council was created as a major political compromise to bring the world together in 1945 to start an idea that perhaps if nations came together and talked, that we would not have another World War II. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. But there were the major political compromises. They had to have all 4 major powers that were the victors in on this full tilt. And so the compromise is that to bring them on, because in some ways you kind of surrender some of your sovereignty, not a lot, but it takes a nick out of your national sovereignty. So the compromise was the 4 powers at the time, now there's 5 with China, had the power to veto anything that they thought was going off the rails so that they had some kind of control. That's created a huge problem, and it's also created a 2-tier justice system, and that's a huge problem. Justice system that is 2-tiered is not a justice system by definition. It's not equal justice for all, is it? It's equal justice for all except for the Soviet Union / Russia, the United States, and China. France and UK are known human rights advocates, and they do a pretty good job of it, other than Algeria, which we won't talk about. But the point being is that the 3 major human rights violators in the world are 3/5 of the UN Security Council. Well, and the bottom line is that because they have veto power, there's nothing that UN can do to sanction them. And that creates, which I think you're kind of implying as well, is that it's 2-tiered. Only the smaller guys get whacked. And so that also creates something, and I got confronted this in town hall meetings. Sierra Leoneans may not have gone to school that we know about, and they may not have any access to any kind of any kind of social media, internet, what have you, but they listen to BBC Focus on Africa 3, 5, 7, and 9, if you've ever been in that part of the world, hand crank radios. So they know the issues, and they talked about it. They actually brought it up. Well, how come, you're holding Sierra Leone and Liberia and others accountable when, the United States just invaded Iraq, and it was aggression, pure and simple, same as Russia's attack on Ukraine. How do you, the key thing is just to be honest with them and say, it ain't perfect. We do what we can, and we hold the people that we accountable when and where we can. And that's all we can do. So I see no, in other words, can a regional organization like the Council of Europe be a little bit more nimble, a little bit more agile, a little bit more fast? Possibly. This is a first effort with the Special Tribunal. It was created, but it took 3 years, and there was a lot of hand wringing, because they were looking for, the shadow of the United States was always in that room, even though the United States has no legal authority to be even in the room because they're not part of the Council of Europe. So I didn't answer your question, but there's no real answer. But I think there were some points that I think you brought up that are important that I can answer. And I think those were important points. So thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you so much. And I apologize for being late. I was actually just teaching a class on Holocaust, genocide, and human rights. And so if you covered this again, my apologies. But I'm really curious what your thoughts are in thinking about this aggression of the fact that we now have a Department of War. Like, can you just maybe speak to that? Not just the rhetoric, but what are the implications of that? Or what are, just given your experience, just what that means, or does it mean anything?
Well, who remembers My Lai massacre? Yeah, you're telling your age, but you remember it. The United States Department of Defense said never again. So we created the DoD Law of War program, of which I helped develop. And it is now required until Secretary of Defense Hexbeth, it was required, let's say this, it's no longer required, but every member of the armed forces at the beginning of their service and each year afterward and before they deploy, get a class in the laws of armed conflict by a judge advocate and a lawyer. And then a lawyer deploys with the unit so that they make sure, like I was in that one moment that I said, helps the commander make really tough decision. God, we wanted that guy. I was like, right there. But we chose not to. We don't do that anymore. In fact, if you look at the Secretary of Defense, by the way, legally, it is the Secretary, I mean, it's the Department of Defense. Only it's in the National Security Act of 1947. They created this Department of Defense. So it takes congressional action to rename that. So it's an administrative thing. So it's just them. He is the Secretary of Defense, and it's the Department of Defense. But he made some, and I've written about this as well, is that we're no longer going to be following the laws of armed conflict, that it's in the way. It gets in the way of our warriors killing people. You know how he is. He's got this manic fixation about, he's got too much testosterone. And he is, and now he opens up every press conference with everybody, let's pray. And he's turned the attack on Iran into the Seventh Crusade. In other words, this is right versus wrong. This is Christian versus those people. And so it's going down a very dark world. So he has relieved the judge advocate generals of the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army, 3-star generals who ran Judge Advocate Generals Corps. I was a member of the Judge Advocate Generals Corps of the Army, established in 1775. The first appointment George Washington made was, this is going to get really tough, I need a lawyer. So again, centuries of service has just been, press hasn't picked up on this, but it's terrible, and it is very negative related to that. Are there judge advocates in the field? Yes, at the unit level there are, but the senior level have been decimated. He's just sending a signal. When the U.S. goes to war, they're going to kill people, and they're not going to be burdened by those damn laws of armed conflict, which he said he hates. And it's those damn Army lawyers, Navy lawyers, Air Force judge advocates who are out there getting in my way and telling my commanders to show mercy. And he actually said no prisoners, didn't he? I think he mentioned that, because I think I wrote about it too. I could write an op-ed every single day. Like I talked to the editor of Jurist, saying, I need to become a columnist, because I am literally can write an op-ed about something going wrong at so many levels and all around the world in the United States. I could do this forever. Just pure violations of law, policy, and ethics every single day. Don't get me started. I'm starting to crank. Well, the American people are going to make a decision in November of 2026, whether we're going to buy into this or we're not. And if they don't buy into it, it's the beginning of a possible beginning. It follows in 2028, and we'll see. If we take both the Senate and the House, Trump's done. It's just the way it is. It's up to us. It was designed to be us. That's the accountability. Because, the founders of the Constitution, which is just a contract between the government and the American people, never contemplated a criminal president. I know we had Richard Nixon, but he resigned under law. But we never contemplated a serving president as a convicted felon and someone who has no interest in law. His only constitutional duty is take care that the laws be faithfully executed. He's not. That's impeachable. Now, I won't go too much down that road, but the bottom line is the Republic is saved or not on 2026. And if the Americans buy into this, where we're going, wow. I'm a lot more happy a guy than this.
We are not living.
No, I mean, I really am. I mean, my grandkids think, and when Grandpa shows up, it's party city.
So Lily, go ahead.
So my question is centered around, I guess, the simplistic terms of watering down how the UN has been operating lately. And there's obvious terms like street knowledge versus book knowledge. And the ambassadors or other people that are coming into the United Nations structure, are they primarily on the educational side, bookworm side of things, where they are reading the news, they're reading this, they're reading reports, et cetera, or are they similar to you where they're going out into the field, they're witnessing these things firsthand, they're able to actually put into speech what is occurring, and kind of, it doesn't seem that way. I'm saying that it doesn't seem that way.
It's actually both. Being an ambassador, just being a human being. You happen to be either politically tied and you get to be an ambassador, or you're appointed by it because you're the smartest person in the room to get that job. So it's the UN is just is a group of men and women who have been asked to do what they're doing, and they come at it in various ways. But it's the art of diplomacy. One of my the favorite thing I did, because a chief prosecutor is both a politician, a diplomat, a lawyer, and so I love the diplomatic game. I kind of learned it a little bit when I was in the national security system once upon a time. I can't talk about that, but it's an artful game. The truth is relative. If you were trying to achieve a certain thing, and in my case, I always thought, as long as it was ethical and lawful, and somebody else, if you're in the national security business, you're violating somebody's law. It may not be the U.S. Because it's illegal to do it, to violate the Constitution. But the point being is that, so diplomacy is an artful dance, and everybody's dancing in the UN. They have their own personal and political interests for their country and themselves. And the people that do it best are the people who are humble, who like to drink, and like to dance. And it's amazing what you can get done. Like I was telling you with Lavrov, Russians drink vodka like I drink water. I'm not a vodka. I don't like vodka. But I would come and sit and chat with him and throw you. After about 3 of those, I don't know whether he was trying to get me loose or him loose, but the bottom line is he respected me because I was hanging in there with him. Now, I'd stagger out of the building, but the point is Russia supported us in the Security Council to take down Charles Taylor. Diplomacy. Problem solved. And I still don't like vodka. But Lavrov knows my name, and when he heard that I was involved in the Ukraine, he was not happy. And I'm sure it was his suggestion that to Putin to make me an enemy of the state. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned about how we're kind of regressing into this age of aggression, not intended to be a play on words, but I guess my concern is, even if you do have organizations like the United Nations grow more of a backbone, or have like another, like some sort of international court that actually holds some power, I guess the concern is that because of this regression into aggression, there's so many nations that are, previous signatory or are current signatories to, any number of conventions that, because of how it could then be used against them, might be unwilling to actually, aid in the prosecution of that. And I do think there are some, good signs as to what happened in Hungary that, Orban's finally out. So it might be a signal of a larger trend. But in the case that it isn't, how even with a more, even with a more strengthened UN or whatever organization it would be, how would it deal with a world that's becoming increasingly more fascistic and unwilling to actually prosecute these crimes?
Good point. I'm not convinced that we're heading into fascism or a total age of aggression. That victory in Hungary was a bellwether of things to come. And there's a lot of nationalist groups, to include a quasi-Nazi group in Germany. I mean, they're out there, but that sends a signal. That sends a signal that I think Europe has kind of like American people are beginning to realize that, make Germany great again, or make America great again, or make Hungary great again, isn't really the way we want this world to go. I'm positive. I think this is going to be, this time next year, I think we're going to be breathing a little bit easier. Inshallah.
Yeah, like this. Yeah.
Okay, we got time for one more quick question.
Well, you ask it quick, and I'll give it quick.
This goes to your point about diplomacy and how with these conflicts of interests, the truth can seem relative. And it reminded me of your point on ambiguity and the ambiguity of legal language in this age of aggression. How do we reconcile with people calling things special military operations, not aggression, preemptory retaliation, it's not aggression, or law enforcement operations?
That's a great point. It really is. And it's that is the national approach to, shaping an aggressive act. That's all it is. It's aggression. And at the international level, nobody's buying it. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it a banana. It's still aggression. Okay, it's a fair point, but those are politicians and advisors to the president who is thinking of taking a unilateral act. We'll call it a special military operation. It doesn't matter. It's not even a defense at the international level. So when Putin and his cohorts are possibly standing before the tribunal for aggression, they can raise the point, but it has no legal. They can't say, well, it wasn't aggression. We call it a special military operation or whatever they did. I don't think it was that. But the point is it has no legal moment. It's not a defense at all. So good point. Well, I think I'm about to get the hook.
Let us all thank Mr. Lecter.
Okay, we're going to take a 15-minute break. We're going to resume at 4 p.m. For our closing remarks. I highly encourage people to stick around. It's Professor Dirk Moses, someone whose work I admire a lot. If you're one of my students, we kick off all our genocide courses reading Professor Moses. And Kate, we read your work too, because it's religion and genocide. So we'll resume at 4 p.m. and Professor Moses will be talking about how and why genocide challenges conventional thinking about warfare and civilian casualties.